Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. And my business partner, Corby McGordon, is here with us today as well. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's transferable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. And a common strategy, exit strategy for a founder of a small business that typical for one of our clients would be to sell to a group of employees or a management team who have expressed desire and some capability to be future owners of the business. And it's often referred to, this strategy, as a management buyout or an MBO in the M&A world. And, there are many factors to be considered in assessing the viability of this particular strategy for selling the owners. We're going to help them consider their personal financial goals, their risk tolerance regarding payment of the sale proceeds, which is going to take place typically over an extended period of time, the buyer's capabilities to be successful business owners. Those are just to name a few. But there's another risk factor that's most often neglected, and that is whether these employees, who may be working very well together as a management team, and maybe for years, will they also succeed and be as effective as co-owners or partners. It's one thing to become a sole owner when you've never owned a business. It's quite another thing to become an owner with other partners at the same time. And if it doesn't work out well, these new partners, the selling owner may not receive all of the expected sale proceeds. They may need to work at resolving conflict between these new business partners, or they may even need to come back into the business to save it. All kinds of bad things can happen if the right planning isn't done. And so today we're going to discuss some of these challenges inherent to a business partnership that should be thoroughly thought through and discussed before a deal is actually ratified. And one of our planning processes to make sure that all of that happens. Okay, and so our topic today is an overlooked risk in management buyouts. And our guest is our friend David Gage. David's a clinical psychologist. David Gage, Ph.D. He's a clinical psychologist, author, mediator, has specialized in conflict, corporate partnership, conflict resolution, and prevention with business partners for over 30 years. He's been doing this a long time. He founded BMC a long time ago, 1990, and has focused on resolving disputes among co-owners of closely held businesses. And by mediating hundreds, literally, of intimate partner battles, David learned everything he needed to know to create a process for preventing conflict. One day, the light bulb went on. He said, you know what? Maybe I should create a process to prevent all the conflict that I'm helping to resolve. And so that focus on conflict prevention and that shift of focus gave rise to the partnership charter process and his book, The Partnership Charter: How to Start Out Right with Your New Business Partnership or Fix the One You're in. And so David and his team, they've fine-tuned this process through the years with feedback from hundreds of partners from around the world. And in recent years, they've worked hard, and we've kind of been along for the ride a little bit, to develop the Design Your Partnership platform, which we will refer to often during this conversation today. So David, it's been a while. We had you on early on 2018, and you're back with us today Thanks again for taking the time and joining us today. We're still looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, it's great to be here. This is just a really exciting topic.
Hey, David, I'm going to start us off. So, I've known you for, I think we just discussed it, probably 30 years. But, I bet some of the listeners are like, wow, this is kind of new. We've never had a Ph.D. clinical psychologist on our show because they may not remember when you were on before. And, Pat's been hesitant to bring the therapist that he meets every day for 2 hours onto the show. So, I think it's great you're here. But
dealing with the likes of you, it does help.
But I think it'd be good, kind of as introductory material for our listeners. Just how did you get interested in helping business owners resolve and prevent conflict? I mean, it seems, given your background, I think it's a great fit, but it's probably something that most listeners are not familiar with.
I think I can help it to make sense pretty quickly. I grew up in a family that had a number of different people, both sets of grandparents, dad, uncles. They all had businesses. But the major one really was my mother's father's business. And when I was young, it went through the transfer from the first generation. He started a construction company in Wisconsin in the 1920s. And so I was young when the second generation, my dad, who was the in-law and his brothers-in-law, took over the business from my grandfather. And, I was just somewhat aware of it at the time, but they had an expert in the construction industry who had gone through one transition in his business, coach them or consult with them. And they just never realized how complicated it is for the next generation of owners to really become owners and work well together. But I saw that, I watched it. I think it's part of growing up in that family business is what got me interested in psychology and specializing in families for a while. And then realizing as I was doing that, whoa, you know what? I know about family businesses and I know they don't have any good place to turn when they get sideways with one another. And it usually doesn't go well. Somebody gets an attorney and then everybody has to get an attorney. And I thought I was early in my practice as a clinical psychologist. And I said, these people need help. And there are a lot of them. So I tried to figure out, I knew therapy really wasn't the answer for family business because it wouldn't work with my family. And it's not really the answer. Therapists don't know how to address all those issues. So I became a mediator and I had a interdisciplinary mediation team made up of psychologists, lawyers, business people. And we were the only ones in the country who were doing it back in the 90s. And as Pat said a moment ago, we learned a lot fast because when you're in a dispute and you have mediators, you have to help them understand what it is. So it took me a while, but finally I got to the point where, hey, helping people, business owners resolve these conflicts is good, but what about trying to prevent them? So we learned a lot, and that all went into the book, the Partnership Charter book, and that focused then, starting from about the year 2000, around then, on helping partners to figure out ways to plan their partnerships so they never got into conflict with one another. Because people often would ask me, well, why do partners get into trouble so much? Is it they're fighting over turf battles and roles, or is it money and greed, or personalities, or values? And I say, yes, and yes. It's all of those, but really the key is the planning. And typically, as we're going to talk about with transitions to the next generation, if there are co-owners in the next generation of owners, there's very little people know about how do you plan partnerships. It's actually not taught at any business school in the country. For a few years, I taught at the business school at American University, but I knew then that it was the only course in the country on how to be partners. So, and we used the book as the text, by the way. It's a great primer in how to have partners. So now my focus is just on helping people who are already working with businesses and partners like Pat and Corby to be able to use the tool that we developed, the process and the tool and the methodology, to help partners really plan thoroughly, so that when they finish their partnership charter, which is a document and a process, they have an enormous amount of confidence that their partnership is planned better than like 95% of all partnerships out there.
What we'd like our listeners to walk away with today is really two things. One would be just either making them aware for the first time or just reinforcing the fact that transfers to management teams, I think some people can think, oh, that's going to be an easy way to go. And it has some serious risks. So we want to make them aware of that. And then we want to talk about what you just hit upon, how the whole partnership charter process can help to minimize that risk. So let's start with the risk. From our perspective, I think what we see a lot is, a lot of our clients, there's a very strong owner. And that, I think, can lull him into thinking that his management team is a great group to take over the business. But what he might not realize is that he's been the one leading the business. They're just following his lead, and they're probably deferring a lot of big decisions and things like that to him or her. So I think it's a big risk, assuming that your management team, number one, is going to work well together. If they're going to be successful as partners and co-owners. And are they really ready to do it? So what are your initial thoughts on these risks to successful management buyout?
I'll just point out that it's really good, Walter, and I'll point out what I think is the kind of subtle misunderstanding that some owners have, and that is that they'll be like thinking about, hey, how does this team work, and watching them work, and maybe even try to pull back a little bit and see how they work together. But they don't fully realize that the dynamic among that team, when they're there, really there and in charge, even if they're pulling back and trying to not be so in charge, is really totally different than the dynamic if they're really out. And this group of people has to make decisions fully themselves. It's a totally different dynamic. In the family business world, the parents can look at their kids and they're in their 50s maybe, and they seem to get along beautifully. I can't tell you the number of families we've walked into where that was the case. They got along beautifully. But then when the parents fully stepped out, it's for that group of siblings or next generation, whether siblings or not, it's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah, so there's that dynamic, which is a very real one. And you combine that with the new dynamic that now these people are owners and not just employees or managers together. They're now owners together. They own an asset together. That's an entirely new dynamic. So then let's drill down some, David, getting more specific on some of these challenges to a partnership that should be addressed, and we do address with the partnership charter. Anything we talk about here today gets addressed when we employ the partnership charter process. So let's get specific on some of those challenges. For instance, vision and direction. There can be differing perspectives on vision and strategy for the future. we're working with a team right now, and one of the things we're clarifying is how many of you share the same vision for the future of the company, and who's misaligned, if anybody. So what about that? And let's just start talking about some of these specific challenges.
Because there are so many. You're absolutely right, Pat. And vision and direction is like, hey, don't we know what this business does and where it's going? Well, maybe to some degree, but if you're a group of partners and you are really then in control, is everybody really on the same page, or do people have slightly different ideas? So that charter process really, here's something about the charter process that works so well. It gets every individual in the partnership or partner to be to think about and write their own thoughts about all of these topics, whether it's vision and direction or ownership or governance or roles and responsibilities. So they all write things down and come to the meetings that are facilitated. And then everybody shares their ideas. And the quality of that discussion is incredibly different than if everybody just gets together and says, hey, what do you guys think about where we're headed? What do we really do? What's our value proposition? All of that stuff. In a group discussion where you don't have a really well prepared group to talk about it and share their ideas, it's totally different. Here's what I think. Everybody agree? Yeah, sure. But if everybody comes with their own ideas to put out on the table, it's very different. So that's a great one. And as you say, there are many. What about just the ownership itself? Is it really equal if there are 4, team members, leadership people who are going to take over? Is it shared equally? And what are the roles? Now, an owner working with a team for years, maybe he's worked with this couple of people for 20 years, maybe he's only worked with this one for 5. That owner may have definite ideas about who's the real leader, who should be this person, who should be that person, how should their roles work. Well, if they're actually going to step back and let these people take over the business, it might be wise to let these people really talk about how they think they can work together. And they may almost certainly they're going to have different ideas than the current owner of the business.
So, David, we know there's, in the partnership, it's massively complex, a ton of dynamics. Are there like predominant themes that you see as people walk in, assumptions that management teams maybe make that need to be realigned, that our listeners out there could even think, okay, well, I want to have an eye for that as I consider this question?
Yes, definitely, Corby. So if they look carefully, the dynamics of a team that might become a team of owners, the dynamics in that group and the leadership and all of that, they have to realize and let this idea sink in that could change dramatically when they step out and these people become owners themselves. There's the boss, and everybody knows that the boss has ideas and kind of favorites, and the boss has set up the structure, the current owner. So then when they are out of the picture, just if that owner can try to appreciate how different it's going to be for these people that they have led, probably very successfully, but it won't look the same. How that team works together will not look the same in the next generation once it's passed.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is that the real decision maker is gone, and and the kids have to figure out how to make decisions themselves, and that's complex.
Totally, very complex. But it just, if you think about it, it is complex. How's it going to happen? It's going to happen through that group getting together. And this is important, of course. The owner has to step back a little bit. They're still the owner. They own 100% of it. But they've got to step back enough to see what this group is really capable of. And let's put it out there right now. If that group sits down and works through a partnership charter process and addresses all of these issues, our styles, our values, how do we handle conflict together? Well, they've got to talk about that, because how they handle conflict when the owner is there it's going to change. When that owner is really not there and it's just the group handling the conflict themselves, as it goes from maybe one owner to 5 or 6 or however many, it's going to be radically different. So that group needs to do a lot of work to, in effect, prove both to themselves and to the current owner that they can do it. So the partnership charter, in effect, is like a road test for the next generation. Can we do it? If we can get through all of these conversations and come to agreements on all of these things, that is huge. But then that charter goes back to the current owner who reads it all and says, this sounds incredible. This sounds doable, or this will never work. And better to recognize that now than after some kind of transition has already been started.
Hey, David, when you have a group like this, someone has to be the leader, though, right? I mean, you can't have 4 equal owners and they're all, doesn't someone have to be leading the show?
Yeah. There's so much. It's so complex. 4 equal owners, you say, Walter. Well, are they going to be 4 equal owners? Okay, let's say worst case scenario, most challenging case scenario is they are 4 equal owners. Right now in the business, they're not owners, but they don't even look like 4 equal people in terms of running the business, right? Because it's the owner who's really running it, but they have this person here, this person here, this person in that job. And what's required is for those 4, let's say, equal owners to sit down and say, well, Patricia, she's actually been the COO. Does that mean she's going to be the CEO when the now CEO owner is out? I don't know. But one of those 4 owners may think, well, she's the COO, the second in charge to the owner now, but I don't see that continuing that way. Those are difficult conversations.
So part of your process then is they're identifying roles.
Oh gosh, there's a role table in the partnership charter process that covers every different major category, usually like 5 different categories, from strategy to operations to HR to finance. And then within each of those categories are different roles that are needed. And the partners to be have to figure out, okay, if we're going to do this as partners, which partner is going to take the lead in these different categories and then in the different roles? And that's going to be new. It's not going to look like what it looks like today. It's going to be new, and they've got to negotiate and talk about it and come up with a pretty detailed plan.
Aren't there skills that have actually not been exercised in their roles as managers that need to evolve and be exercised as owners?
Yeah, absolutely, Corby, and skills and a way of dealing with one another and talking with one another. Just imagine, say again, 4 people, and they've been sitting down, say those same four people have been sitting down with the owner in meetings to think about how the company's operating, how to make positive changes to the company. And suddenly, and what those conversations are like, and then you take this person out. Well, the conversations are going to be incredibly different. So that partnership charter process gives these four people a way to realize, whoa, this is a new day. You know, it's tomorrow's going to be different if we get to tomorrow. And as I tell people often, in about at least 15 to 20% of the time, the group of partners that looks like the group of partners may not be the same at the end of the partnership charter process. Somebody may say at anywhere along in the process, you know what, guys, this is not for me. And oftentimes they will actually stay. They'll say, I'd like to stay. I love my job. I want to stay here. I'm fine with the transition, but I don't think I want to become an owner. Well, that's like worth its weight in gold, right? Because that just saves so much agony later on if they actually did become an owner, and then it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, it saves a lot of agony downstream in regard to those. We keep saying four people. In this case, four people. But it also saves the selling owner. Just want to make sure this point is clear. It mitigates their risk of being paid or not paid, and the business continuing to flourish or not flourish, because if in the midst of the process, one or more people decide, you know what, no, for whatever reason, can be a lot of reasons, that I don't want to be an owner or a partner, that can save not just those folks a lot of heartache, but also the selling owner.
Yeah, so just in the past 12 months, a couple advisors who were working with a company in California, in LA, that transitioned from the founder to the next generation, which looked like it would be three people. The three people went through the entire charter process. And it wasn't until at the end of the charter process, the folks who are going to become partners step back and they say, wow, look at all these agreements we made and all these 14 different areas, every personality, interpersonal stuff to money and ownership and governance. Look at all these things. You got to step back and look. Now, does all of that we just negotiated and talked about and came to agreement on, does it really all hang together and make sense? And at the end, one of the three said, I don't really feel good about this piece. And they talked and they agreed that the other two were going to become the owners and the next generation. And she wanted to stay as an employee, as a key employee, clearly a key employee, but not be an owner. And what the other two said, that during the whole process, there were signs that it wouldn't really work with her being one of the three owners, but it was okay. They got through it. But when they looked at the whole thing, they said, yeah, it doesn't quite feel right.
Yeah. What I heard you just say as well is there's an honesty that comes out in this process that might not if there is not a process like this.
That's such a good point, Corby. It's this is not work for the faint of heart. This is like serious discussions and negotiations. I mean, you look at your personality style, and somebody's really dominant and somebody's really accommodating, and you drill down on that stuff and you get to some nitty-gritty kind of discussions.
Yeah. So, hey, David, with the few minutes we have left, let's do two things. Let's just mention a few other challenges that are addressed, but then let's review the three steps of the process, the partnership charter. So we mentioned vision, and then there's values. That's critical. Contributions, you mentioned that. Also, there's roles and authorities. That was brought up. Conflict management,
Ownership,
governance.
and governance, which is different a little bit than the day-to-day roles and decision making.
Mm-hmm.
How to handle conflict, how to manage conflict in the business.
Money, how they each feel about money.
Huge. Not just how they feel about it, but how are we going to distribute profits? What kind of salaries are we going to have? I mean, the owner may think they've got different salaries, they're going to keep different salaries. They may not decide.
Yeah, now that they're owners, they may have a completely different perspective on that. And two, like one new owner or partner may be very willing to leverage and take on debt to build the company, where another owner, they may not want to have anything to do with that. So, listeners, that gives you an idea of all the different challenges, categories that this process we take folks through with this, with helping to mitigate this risk. Now, the process, David,
right?
It's discover.
Yeah, that first piece
discuss and document.
Discover, discuss, and document. That first part about the discovery is where they use the online tool and answer over 400 questions in like 14 different areas. So it's like a mini course in partnership. And then when they all start to get together and have the joint meetings to discuss all that they wrote down, those discussions, as I said earlier, they're so rich. They're so different than what you would ever have in a lawyer's office or just sitting around trying to think about how are we going to do this. And there's all the negotiation that goes on there. And let me stress this, just the creativity of how can we do this together and really make it work, and how can we be an incredible team. And then as they're doing those discussions, the online tool helps them to begin documenting the third step, documenting those understandings, commitments to one another about how they're going to work together, and all of their agreements. That all has to be documented, because sometimes when it gets written down, people say, wait a minute, that's not what I just agreed to. So that takes that confusion away. And it also is the document that 6 months later and a year later, they can sit down and have their partner retreat and review it and say, are we living up to our commitments? Are we in line with our agreements, or do we have to modify them somehow? So that's the discover, discuss, and document. 3 critical steps.
Before Walter wraps us up here, one more question. What would you say to a listener, an owner out there who says, you know what, I get it. I'm going to buy the book, and I'm going to buy it for all my managers, and we're going to go through it together. I'll lead the process.
Yeah.
What would you say to that owner who's listening?
That's the kiss of death.
Just don't sugarcoat it either.
Yeah. The process with the owner there will look completely different than that owner taking themselves out of the process and saying, you guys do this with a facilitator, which will be enormously helpful. Make sure you don't skip over difficult topics and everything. You guys do this on your own, and then I want to see what you come up with, because it'll be completely different than what they would come up with the owner there. Completely. They won't even say the same things with the owner there than they will when it's just the group of potential owners.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's such an important point.
Excellent. Right. And Walter, let me say one more thing before you bring us home, so to say. So our process, listeners, for owners who want to go down this path of selling to insiders, be it managers or key employees. Our process is first we're gonna test the financial feasibility of it, because there's a lot to look at there, and Corby leads that whole process just to see if it's even financially feasible, considering your personal financial goals, as well as the value of the business, cash flow of the business in different scenarios, and whether in the bankability of the business, all of that. It just needs to be, all the math needs to be done and the numbers crunched just to see if it's financially feasible. Then if it is, and that box can be checked, then we strongly recommend that this is the next step, that we start to go through the partnership charter just to see if these folks can end up being owners. And that's going to help you mitigate your risk, selling owner, and help them to more ensure success, and help them make a decision as to whether or not they want to be an owner or a partner as well. Like David said, it's not unusual for one or more to drop out in the course of the process, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing when that happens. So, David, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's always a joy. It's a pleasure to work with you. Before Walter closes, is there any last thing that you would say?
I think we covered really all the key points. That getting ready to be partners is something that anybody, you're starting a business from scratch. Anybody needs to engage in those deep discussions. But clearly, if you're kind of related already on a management team, then it's really so critical to sit down and say, how's this going to change when, our trusted owner is no longer here influencing our decision making? Even as sort of an independent team, it's critical to say, it's going to be different. Let's talk about how.
Thanks, David. This has been great, as we knew it would be. So I'm sure a lot of listeners their curiosity is piqued regarding the partnership charter. So how can they get in contact with you or learn more about that?
Well, I'd say they need to contact Pat and Corby and talk to them about leading that process. But a good place to start is really with the partnership charter book. It's still really a valuable tool to help people understand what the enormous advantages of partnerships, but what the challenges are as well. And it looks at all these different areas and sort of spells out some of the complexity of them, which solo owners may not really have much of a clue about. Really, they don't need to. So I think the book is great, and then contacting Pat and Corby and saying, how does this work? How do you guys work with us in doing this?
Yeah. And just to clear up, I'm being a tax guy. Partnership means a specific thing to me, but partnership charter is any type of business entity. It's a group of people working together.
Great point. C Corp, S Corp, partnership, whatever, doesn't really matter. We're talking about, hey, how do we work together to manage day to day and figure out the long-term strategy and all of that stuff.
Right. Fantastic.
Good.
Thanks again. Really appreciate it. Great seeing you as always.
So good to be here. Thanks, you guys.
And listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Pat and Corby at 301-859-0860. You can reach me at 301-951-9090. And if you've benefited from today's episode, please consider liking and sharing it on social media. As always, thanks for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Walter Dial and Pat Ennis signing off.